As the Prohibition era tightened its grip on Chicago, a battle for dominance erupted in the city's underworld, where power was measured in bloodshed. Haimie Weiss, the fierce and calculating leader of the North Side Gang, emerged as one of the most formidable adversaries Al Capone would ever face. Known for his cold intelligence and an unyielding thirst for vengeance, Haimie challenged the very foundations of Chicago's criminal empire. His strategic genius and relentless pursuit of justice for his slain mentor turned the tide of the gang wars, setting the stage for a deadly showdown that would leave an indelible mark on Chicago's underworld. Earl J. Hymie Weiss was born Henryk Wojciechowsk on January 25, 1898, in Sieradz, a city in Congress Kingdom of Poland. In 1901, his parents, Walenty Wojciechowski and Maria Bruskiewicz, emigrated to the United States. After settling in Buffalo, New York, they took the names of William and Mary Weiss. Soon after, they moved to an Irish district in the north of Chicago, the district in which Haimie would meet his childhood friend, the Irish-American Dean O'Banion. Haimie's siblings were Bernard, Frederick, Violet, and the eldest of the brothers, Joseph. Joseph, who was a saloon keeper, is said to have passed away in his late 20s. Chicago police records give his underworld name as Haimie the Polak, but mostly he would be referred to as Haimie. Haimie was known to be religious. He often carried crucifixes and rosaries in his pockets and was a regular attendant at Mass. As an act of kindness, there was a time when a poor family couldn't pay their grocery bill. Haimie not only paid off his parents' tab but also covered the struggling neighbor's bill, instructing the grocer to keep it quiet. Many people liked Haimie's enigma and personality, and often told stories of his kindness. Others who disliked his personality shuddered in fear. Years later, someone close to him would witness firsthand what Haimie's dark side truly looked like. By the guidelines set down by the Selective Service Act, all males aged 21 to 30 were required to register to potentially be selected for military service. At the request of the War Department, Congress amended the law in August 1918 to expand the age range to include all men 18 to 45 and to bar further volunteering. In June 1918, Haimie attempted to enlist, and being only 20 years old, he lied on the registrar's report and noted his birth year as 1897. However, due to a double rupture listed in the medical section, he was denied. By this time, Haimie had already adopted the name Earl, as opposed to Henryk, which can be seen on the registration card. It would be the year 1920 when Haimie's family would see the other side of him. His brother Fred returned from France after his military service. He made a comment to Haimie about him not serving his country. Haimie then whipped out his gun in anger and shot his brother. Haimie's family tried to cover up the incident. Even Fred pleaded the doctor at the Washington Boulevard Hospital not to tell the police. They all claimed it was an accident. Haimie, later picked up by police, said that the gun was under a pillow and somehow discharged accidentally. However, the pillow nor bedding showed any bloodstains. The police later let Haimie go. However, Haimie and Fred would never speak again. Haimie's bad side was further revealed when photographers tried taking a picture of him. He glared at them and told them he'd kill them if they took a picture. On another occasion, he threatened to kill his first cousin after the latter knocked him down with his fists during an argument. It's said that Haimie once drove off a deputy U.S. Marshal at gunpoint when the officer attempted to arrest a friend at a party for violating the Mann Act. The marshal later returned with backup, then arrested the friend and seized a stash of alcohol and weapons. Following the raid, Haimie filed a lawsuit, alleging that the marshals had stolen his silk shirts and socks, but neither the charges nor the lawsuit led to any significant outcome. In his early 20s, which is most probably after he was denied military service, Haimie became involved in criminal activities which included burglary and car theft. In 1919, police found 2 stolen cars at 128 North Cicero. Shortly after, Haimie and 2 accomplices were caught arriving in a third stolen car. The police later discovered their possessions, which included tools to dismantle car chassis, license plates, and many car parts. Haimie nevertheless had greater vision and cooler judgment than his future boss Dean O'Banion, and police often thought him the one who had steered the gang into bootlegging. The North Side Gang, like many other Prohibition-era gangs in Chicago, evolved from the Market Street Gang, a group of street toughs operating at the turn of the 20th century. The Market Street Gang, active in the 42nd and 43rd wards, was comprised of pickpockets, sneak thieves, and labor sluggers. The gang gained notoriety during the circulation wars of the early 1910s, when rival newspapers, the Chicago Examiner and the Chicago Tribune, battled for dominance. Hymie Weiss, Dean O'Banion, Vincent Drucci, and George Bugs Moran joined the Market Street Gang, and later they became sluggers. These sluggers were thugs hired by a newspaper to beat newsstand owners who did not sell the paper. They were first hired by the Chicago Tribune and later the Tribune's rival, the Chicago Examiner. Vincent Drucci, originally named Ludovico D'Ambrosio, started small pilfering telephone coin boxes as a child. His knack for wild robbery and kidnapping schemes earned him the nickname the Schemer. George Moran, the gang's most stoic figure, was notorious for his sudden, uncontrollable rages, leading newspapers to dub him Bugs. Then there was the future leader, the Irish-American Charles Dean O'Banion, who would later lead their gang into a mob war with Al Capone and Johnny Torrio. Their favorite hangout was McGovern's Liberty Inn, and on building rooftops, Haimie and his gangster friends practiced their aim, shooting pigeons and rats. The Market Streeters preyed on pedestrians and store owners alike, perpetrating shoplifting sprees, purse snatchings, and at times, robberies at gunpoint. Through Moses Annenberg, these boys were introduced to the political decision-makers throughout the 42nd and 43rd wards, who called upon the mobs to help steer the outcomes of elections. The means by which this occurred often involved intimidation, ballot box stuffing, and murder. Haimie, alongside Dean O'Banion and Charles the Oxriser, tried their hand at safe-blowing. Later, in 1921, these three, along with George Bugs Moran, were caught attempting to blow up a safe, but the charges were eventually dropped. By then, Haimie had earned the nickname the Perfume Burglar after accidentally knocking over perfume bottles during a robbery, leaving him reeking of French perfume. However, before that came Prohibition, or the Noble Experiment as it was called, which was a nationwide ban that prohibited the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol. It was enacted in the United States in January 1920 and would last nearly 13 years. It inadvertently gave birth to bootlegging, which would transform the American mafia into a new breed of gangster. Dean O'Banion and his crew anticipated that America wouldn't fully embrace prohibition and that the demand for alcohol would persist. Well before the law took effect, O'Banion began making preparations, recognizing the opportunity it presented. He decided to focus on beer distribution, but also partnered with whiskey and gin suppliers to meet the diverse demands of the market. Months before Prohibition began, O'Banion established connections with underground beer suppliers in Canada, arranging for shipments to start as soon as the ban was in place. Understanding that his customers in the wards he controlled wanted only the best, he dismissed the idea of using inferior local brews. Meeting this demand became his primary goal by any means necessary. On December 19, 1921, O'Banion executed Chicago's first liquor hijacking. He spotted a truckload of Grom's and Ulrich whiskey, stopped at a sign in Chicago's downtown, in an area known as the Loop. He brazenly entered the truck's cab, pushed the surprised driver out, and drove the load to Maxwell Street. O'Banion offloaded at Samuel J. Morton, who operated a garage that served as a depot for stolen goods. With saloon keepers eager to continue their operations underground, within minutes, O'Banion sold the entire shipment over the phone from Morton's shop. As Prohibition took hold, O'Banion was determined to stay ahead of the game. Knowing that a half-hearted effort wouldn't suffice, he set out to establish his dominance as the sole beer supplier in the 42nd and 43rd wards. Armed with revolvers, he and his men swiftly eliminated any competition. One early victim was Steve Wisniewski, who made the mistake of hijacking an O'Banion truck just weeks into Prohibition. He became Chicago Gangland's first casualty of the infamous one-way ride, a term which was allegedly coined by Hymie Weiss. The O'Banion mob, known as the North Side Gang, came to dominate the North Side and the Gold Coast, Chicago's affluent northern lakefront area. As O'Banion's reputation in the underworld expanded, he attracted more followers, including the before-mentioned Samuel Nails Morton, Louis Two-Gun Altery, and Handsome Dan McCarthy. In 1919, a young New Yorker, Alphonse Capone, arrived in Chicago to work for Johnny Torrio. In New York, Capone was working for Torrio as a bartender at the Harvard Inn, a bar in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn, owned by Torrio's business associate Frankie Yale. Torrio now worked for Vincenzo Colosimo, or Big Jim as he was known, the head of a burgeoning vice empire in Chicago. Torrio was reputedly invited to the city to help deal with Black Hand extortionists. After doing so, Torrio became a top lieutenant in Colosimo's organization, rising to underboss by 1914. When Prohibition came into effect in 1920, Torrio urged the gang to get involved in bootlegging, but Colosimo stubbornly refused. On May 11, 1920, Colosimo drove to his cafe to meet an associate he had never met before. Shortly after entering the restaurant, he was shot and killed by a gunman hiding in the cloakroom. Contract killer Frankie Yale allegedly traveled from New York to Chicago to personally eliminate Big Jim Colosimo at Torrio's request. The Northsiders, on the one hand, however, would sometimes intercept and hijack beer trucks belonging to the predominantly Italian South Side mob led by Johnny Torrio. In retaliation, Torrio's men would steal O'Banion's shipments. Worried that open warfare could disrupt the steady flow of profits that more peaceful conditions allowed, the business-minded Torrio personally contacted O'Banion, who was willing to negotiate and compromise. O'Banion accepted the offer, but with caution, bringing Hymie along to the meeting. He was well aware that Torrio, originally a Naples-born Brooklyn thug and a graduate of the notorious 5 Points Gang, had risen to power through a combination of opportunism and strategic maneuvering. As a master tactician, Torrio knew where to position his forces and how to invest his profits, using people to his advantage. He was the first to treat the underworld like a corporation, and his approach would serve as the blueprint for the consolidation of organized crime in the decades to come. Torrio's ingenuity was most evident in the alliances he forged between himself and other territorial gangs that would have otherwise been his enemies. He positioned himself as a king, built a formidable army of loyalists, and with the diplomacy of a seasoned ambassador, approached each rival individually, persuading them that compromise was preferable to death. He allowed them to operate independently and profit from their own ventures, but they had to pay him tribute regularly. And Torrio's trusted general, Al Capone, vigilantly oversaw the empire, ensuring that agreements were honored and providing reinforcements when allies needed help fending off intruders. A sharp dresser who used talcum powder to lighten the scar on his left cheek, he operated under the pseudonym Al Brown, used furniture dealer. Despite his loyalty, O'Banion trusted Capone the least, more so than Torrio's other key figures like Jake Guzik, Frank Nitti, or even Machine Gun Jack McGurn. When O'Banion and Hymie arrived at Torrio's office at the Four Deuces to hear his proposed compromise, Capone was present as an arbitrator. A single look from his boss signaled to Hymie to keep a close eye on him. The deal Torrio presented was similar to the ones he had offered to others, but with additional nuances. Knowing that he controlled the most profitable beer territory in the city, and that the Italians coveted it, O'Banion paid close attention to the subtleties in Torrio's peace offering. Meanwhile, Al Capone and Hymie Weiss listened intently, eyeing each other warily. Torrio proposed that they split the profits from several breweries on the north side, including the lucrative Sieben Brewery on Larrabee Street. In exchange, O'Banion would receive an equal share of the earnings from various distilleries and betting parlors run by Capone in the suburbs, including a gambling house known as the Ship. Though hesitant and resolving to keep a close eye on the Italians, Dean O'Banion agreed to the arrangement. The North Side Gang had now joined the Chicago Syndicate, which was split into various territories. Torrio and Capone controlled the Loop, much of the South Side and several suburbs, while O'Banion held the North Side. The Jenna brothers and Diamond Joe Esposito ran Little Italy southwest of the Loop. Edward Spike O'Donnell managed the Kerry Patch district in the far south. William Klondike O'Donnell ruled the far west side. Terry Druggan and Frankie Lake ran the near west side. Joe Saltis and Frankie McEarlane oversaw the Stockyards neighborhood, and Roger Toohey controlled the distant suburbs. Nevertheless, it wouldn't be long and the hot-headed O'Banion was back to causing trouble, hijacking not only Capone's trucks, but those of the other mobsters as well. In 1921, O'Banion purchased shares in William Schofield's flower shop, which soon became the preferred florist for mob funerals. The shop was conveniently located directly across from Holy Name Cathedral, where O'Banion and Hymie attended Mass. The rooms above Schofield's flower shop served as the North Side Gang's headquarters. Hymie would often rest on a couch in the second-floor area of the shop while dealing with arterial cancer, which caused symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, and fainting spells. On January 20, 1924, while Hymie was walking with O'Banion, they spotted prize-fight referee Davy Yiddles Miller and his brother Max, leaving a theater with the crowd. O'Banion, in plain view of hundreds of witnesses, shot Yiddles in the stomach. Though O'Banion was arrested, both brothers declined to press charges. The Miller brothers, involved in extortion, gambling, and bootlegging, had recently threatened to take over O'Banion's 15% share of Cicero's profitable ship. 5 days after the shooting, Hymie, O'Banion, and Dapper Dan were stopped by 2 policemen on the near south side. In the back seat of their car, the trio was holding 2 truck drivers captive, having just hijacked a shipment of 251 cases of Haviland rye. The police arrested them and took them to the detective bureau where they were booked. The next day, they were released on bail. 3 months later, a federal grand jury indicted O'Banion, Hymie, and McCarthy for hijacking, with a trial date set for July 7th. To make matters worse, without Torrio's approval, O'Banion persuaded a number of West Side saloon keepers to relocate their speakeasies to his territory in Cicero. This move boosted his earnings to $100,000 a month, 5 times the agreed-upon amount and surpassing the profits from Capone-run saloons across the rest of the village. To placate Capone, Torrio attempted to strike a deal with the cunning Irishman. He offered to let O'Banion keep a portion of his expanded business in exchange for giving Capone a share, while Torrio would transfer an equivalent stake in their brothel operations in Forest View to O'Banion. O'Banion dismissively replied, saying, "Go peddle your papers, Johnny." Like Hymie, O'Banion was a churchgoer and wanted nothing to do with that filthy business. Meanwhile, the Jenna brothers began encroaching on O'Banion's North Shore territory, selling their inferior booze at half or even a third of the price he charged for his quality Canadian import whiskey. O'Banion demanded that Torrio keep the Jennas out of the North Side, threatening to handle the situation himself if necessary. Torrio, however, responded that only Mike Merlo, the head of the Unione Siciliana, had any influence over the Jennas, and that even he struggled to control them at times. In retaliation, O'Banion hijacked a $30,000 shipment of Jenna whiskey. The 6 Jenna brothers convened a family council and unanimously voted to kill O'Banion, but their plan was vetoed by Mike Merlo. Like Johnny Torrio, Mike Merlo, who was dying of cancer, believed that problems were best resolved through negotiation rather than gangland violence. When O'Banion caught wind of the Jennas' plot against him, he approached Torrio claiming that he planned to retire and move out west. He offered to sell his share of the North Side Seaben Brewery, which he co-owned with Torrio and Capone, for $500,000. Torrio quickly accepted and paid O'Banion promptly. However, O'Banion requested one last favor, that Torrio be present at the next shipment. At 5 a.m. on May 19, 1924, 13 trucks were loading beer at the Seaben Brewery on North Larrabee when squads of Chicago police, led by Chief Collins, suddenly raided the premises. The police seized about 130,000 gallons of beer and arrested 31 bootleggers, including Johnny Torrio and Dean O'Banion. After their release, Torrio confirmed through a police informant what he had suspected all along. O'Banion had known about the raid well in advance. On July 7th, Hymie O'Banion and Dapper Dan McCarthy stood trial for hijacking the 2 truckloads of Haviland rye. On the witness stand, the drivers seemed confused and claimed to remember nothing. After 36 ballots, the jury was deadlocked at 10-2. One of the 10, an elderly farmer, even knelt down and prayed for the 2 holdouts to vote for conviction, but they had already accepted $25,000 each in bribes. The case was ultimately dismissed. On November 3rd, Hymie, O'Banion, and Drucci attended their weekly profit-sharing session at the ship. During the meeting, Capone mentioned that the previous week, Angelo Jenna had lost $30,000 at the ship's gambling tables, some of it in IOUs. As a gesture of goodwill, Capone suggested they destroy the markers. Instead, O'Banion picked up the phone, called Angelo, and demanded payment within a week. Back at Schofield's, Hymie advised moderation, urging O'Banion to treat the Jennas less harshly. O'Banion dismissed the idea and said, "To hell with them Sicilians." This remark quickly spread through the underworld, angering both Sicilians and other Italians. Torrio and Capone then met with the Jennas, as Torrio was furious with O'Banion for cheating him out of $500,000, mocking him, and putting him at risk of imprisonment. The decision for O'Banion's elimination was unanimous. O'Banion's actions, including his support for Republican Robert Crowe for Cook County State's attorney in the upcoming November election, caused political problems for the Torrio-Capone outfit. Torrio needed Democrat Michael E. Goh in the state's attorney's position to secure the outfit's operations. The survival of these gangs depended heavily on their political connections, including relationships with mayors, state's attorneys, judges, and law enforcement officials. Despite efforts by Torrio on Election Day, the tally was 98% Republican in the 42nd Ward. On Saturday, November 8, 1924, Mike Merlo, the head of Chicago's Unione Siciliana, passed away. With Mike Merlo's death, Dean O'Banion lost a key protector. On November 10, 1924, 3 men, including Brooklyn gangster Frankie Yale, entered the O'Banion Schofield flower shop, then shot and killed him. Hymie called Schofield's flower shop, hoping to speak with O'Banion, but William Schofield delivers the devastating news. Dean O'Banion has just been killed. Stunned, Hymie feels his world collapse. He walks into the bathroom and sinks to the floor, arms crossed, staring blankly with his back against the bathtub. George Bugs Moran, Ralph Moss, and his mother, Mary Weiss, knock on the door, trying to reach him. With no response, they force the door open and find Hymie sitting motionless, despondent. When asked if he's okay, he barely whispers, "Everything I have is gone." Eventually, Hymie pulls himself together and shares the tragic news with them. His best friend, O'Banion, had been shot and killed. Once he regains his composure, a fire ignites within him. Hymie vows to seek revenge against those responsible. The hunt for retribution begins with Johnny Torrio, the man behind the hit, squarely in his sights. 2 days after Mike Merlo's funeral, Dean O'Banion's funeral was held with 20,000 men, women, and children in attendance at the Mount Carmel gravesite. Capone sent a basket of roses while he and Torrio attended O'Banion's wake. If the Torrio-Capone outfit hoped to eliminate resistance from the North Side, they were surely alarmed when Hymie Weiss, Vincent Drucci, and George Bugs Moran retaliated with fierce vengeance. After the Mike Merlo and Dean O'Banion funerals, Johnny Torrio and his wife went on an extended vacation trip. Hell-bent on revenge, the new leader of the North Siders, Hymie Weiss, was readying his crew for his first attack. In the early hours of January 12, 1925, a sedan with its side curtains drawn and license plate obscured forced Capone's car to the curb at 55th and State. The sedan's occupants unleashed a barrage of gunfire, riddling Capone's vehicle with bullets and shotgun pellets. A police sergeant who arrived at the scene and after inspecting the heavily damaged car jokingly said, "They let it have everything but the kitchen stove." According to some accounts, Al Capone was not in the car at the time. Some accounts, like myalcaponemuseum.com, in fact, state that it might have been the wrong Capone's car, and that it might have been Ralph Capone's car. In any event, remarkably, 2 of the 3 men inside were unharmed. Capone's driver, Sylvester Barton, was shot in the back after turning away when the sedan cut him off, and he fell below the line of fire. The 2 men in the back seat had ducked to the floorboards and avoided injury. Reportedly, the attempt prompted Capone to order an armored Cadillac from General Motors with bulletproof windows, which cost about $30,000 at the time. On January 17th, Capone marked his 26th birthday, coinciding with Torrio's guilty plea on the Seaben Brewery charges. Torrio was given a few days to sort out his affairs before heading to jail. However, on January 24th, while returning from shopping with his wife, Torrio was ambushed by Hymie Weiss and George Bugs Moran, with Vincent Drucci driving the getaway car. Weiss and Moran unleashed a barrage of gunfire using a .45 caliber pistol and a 12-gauge shotgun. One bullet shattered the glass of Torrio's car, another injured his chauffeur's legs, and Torrio himself was struck in the arm as he stumbled over his shopping packages. His wife Anna watched in horror as the assailants continued their attack, with shots hitting Torrio in the jaw, lung, and abdomen. As Bugs Moran aimed his .45 at Torrio's temple for the final shot, the gun clicked empty. Moran struggled to reload while Drucci signaled with the car horn that it was time to leave. Al Capone, vowing revenge, placed guards around Torrio 24/7 at the hospital. Torrio gradually recovered from his injuries, but refused to identify his attackers to the police. After almost a year in jail and a full recovery, Torrio made a strategic decision. He transferred all of his Chicago operations to Al Capone, then moved to Italy with his wife and mother. In 1928, Torrio would return to the United States and play a prominent role alongside gangsters like Lucky Luciano, Longy Zwillman, Joe Adonis, Frank Costello, and Meyer Lansky. On May 26, 1925, Angelo Genna, the newly appointed president of the Unione Siciliana, was ambushed during a high-speed car chase. As he tried to evade 4 men in another car, which included Bugs Moran and Vincent Drucci, he lost control and crashed into a lamppost. Stunned and likely already wounded from the chase, he was a sitting duck when the pursuers pulled up alongside him. The gunman fired over a dozen shots into his defenseless body for good measure. Bystanders later found Angelo semi-conscious, clawing at his still holstered gun. At the hospital, when a detective asked who was responsible, Angelo, sticking to the code of omerta, said nothing, and by the time his older brother Sam arrived, Angelo Genna was already dead. According to the book, Al Capone's Beer Wars, after the murder of Angelo Genna, Hymie went to jail for 6 months on a bootlegging conviction and was released from McHenry County Jail in the fall of 1925. On June 13, 1925, Mike Genna, along with Albert Anselmi and John Scalisi, engaged in a shootout with George Bugs Moran and Drucci. Although Drucci was slightly wounded, he and Bugs Moran managed to escape. Afterward, the police chased Mike Genna, Albert Anselmi, and John Scalisi, resulting in the deaths of 2 policemen. During the chase, Mike Genna was shot in the leg, causing him to dive through a basement window in a desperate attempt to hide. Police later found him on the dirt floor, bleeding profusely from a leg artery. However, he died in the ambulance. On July 8, 1925, Anthony Genna received a phone call from Antonio the Cavalier Spano, who requested a meeting that morning at the corner of Grand Avenue and Curtis Street, promising important information. As the 2 met and greeted, 2 other men came from behind and shot Anthony 5 times in the back. Anthony was rushed to the hospital but succumbed to his wounds. On the morning of August 1926, after a late breakfast in Drucci's Congress Hotel suite, Hymie and Drucci headed toward the Standard Oil building to meet with Morris Eller, a sanitary district trustee, and John Sparborough, an undertaker and assistant state's attorney. Drucci had $13,500 in cash on him, supposedly for a real estate deal, but more likely a bribe for the North Side Gang's 20th Ward backers. As they neared the building, Louis Barco and 3 others jumped out of a car on Michigan Avenue and opened fire. Drucci took cover behind parked cars while Haimie managed to reach the lobby unharmed. Drucci returned fire and tried to escape by jumping onto a passing car, but the police quickly intervened and pulled him off. The attackers fled, leaving one behind. Despite the chaos, no one was injured, and the incident lasted less than 2 minutes. The police identified the man left behind as Louis Barco, an Al Capone gunman, suspecting a mob hit, but Drucci downplayed it, claiming it was just a robbery attempt. Just 5 days later, Haimie and Drucci were driving south on Michigan Avenue when a car pulled up alongside them, ramming their vehicle and shooting out its windows. Haimie and Drucci returned fire before jumping out of their car and running into the lobby of the nearby Standard Oil building, while the attackers sped away. On September 20, 1926, a convoy of cars slowly drove past the Hawthorne Inn, each vehicle pausing in front of the hotel, as North Siders armed with submachine guns opened fire on the windows of the restaurant and nearby storefronts. When the initial barrage ended, a man in brown overalls stepped out of one of the cars, walked briskly to the inn's entrance and knelt down. He systematically sprayed the lobby with gunfire, sweeping his Thompson submachine gun from left to right and back again. According to Carl Sifakis, a Capone gunman, Louis Barco or Paul Ricca, and an innocent bystander outside in a car during the attack were slightly injured. Capone gave the injured bystander $5,000 for her medical bills. When Capone was asked who was responsible for that drive-by shooting, he reportedly said, "Watch the morgue, they'll show up there." What these extortionists didn't anticipate was that some of their targets were just as dangerous as they were. One such individual on the near west side was a determined young man named Vincenzo Gibaldi, later known as Jack McGurn. Driven by a desire to avenge his stepfather's 1923 murder, McGurn tracked down and killed all 3 of the murderers within a couple of days in 1926. Under Capone's wing, McGurn's leadership quickly made the gang's operations more organized and efficient. After the Hawthorne Inn drive-by shooting, Al Capone had the new Unione Siciliana president, Tony Lombardo, reach out to Hymie Weiss to arrange a peace meeting on October 4th at the Sherman Hotel. It was widely believed in the underworld that the only person Capone ever truly feared was 28-year-old Haimie Weiss. At the meeting, Lombardo represented Capone as he was not present, and offered the North Siders exclusive rights to sell beer in all of Chicago north of Madison Street. However, Haimie demanded more. His minimum price for peace was the heads of Anselmi and Scalisi, the men who killed O'Banion. Capone quickly realized that there would be no negotiating with Haimie. On October 8th, a man using the name Oscar London rented a second-floor front room at 740 North State Street, right next to Schofield's. At the same time, a woman named Mrs. Thomas Schultz rented a third-floor room at 1 West Superior Street, just south of the florist shop. From her room, she had a clear view of both the front and rear entrances of Schofield's. Shortly after, Oscar London disappeared, and his room was occupied by 2 men, one in a gray fedora and overcoat, the other in a cap and dark suit. Similarly, Mrs. Schultz vanished, and her room was also taken over by 2 men. This strategic rental operation was orchestrated by Jack McGurn. It was a part of a careful reconnaissance effort, positioning operatives in key locations to monitor Schofield's flower shop and prepare for the next phase of their plan. As the Capone shooters lay in wait, Haimie Weiss finally emerges at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, just before rush hour. Accompanied by his driver, Sam Peller, and bodyguard, Patty Murray, they are returning to Schofield's after spending time in court. Joining them are Benjamin Jacobs, a 20th Ward politician and private investigator, and William O'Brien, a former state's attorney and one of Chicago's most prominent criminal lawyers. Peller parked their Cadillac sedan in front of Holy Name Cathedral, directly across from the flower shop. As the 5 men begin crossing State Street, 2 shooters in the nearby apartment, one of whom is Jack McGurn, open fire with a submachine gun and a shotgun. Haimie is struck by 10 bullets and died instantly. Patty Murray, hit by 15 rounds, collapsed a few yards away. William O'Brien, riddled with 7 bullets in his arm, abdomen, and thigh, dragged himself to the curb. When the police arrived, they found Peller, shot in the groin, pleading with the growing crowd for help. Jacobs had also been wounded in the leg. The two assassins made their escape down the back stairs of the building, exiting through a window into the alley. Later, the Thompson submachine gun used by McGurn is discovered atop a dog kennel a block south of Superior Street. The second gun nest on West Superior Street never served its purpose and was only there in case the first gun nest failed to hit their targets. Haimie Weiss's death marked a significant turning point in Chicago's criminal world, paving the way for Al Capone's unchallenged dominance. As Capone tightened his grip, the stage was set for further violence, culminating in the infamous St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which would seal his reign and redefine the power dynamics in Chicago's underworld.